Hello, my name is Dr. Matthew Robinson. I'll be talking today to you about retention. The title of our presentation is Retention, Keeping Your Athletes in the Game. The first thing we ought to do is define retention. Customer retention refers to that ability to keep a customer engaged with our product. The high customer retention means that we're able to continue to have them as customers as they move through the life cycle of their life. Now, when you take a look at the evolution of Steph Curry, how and why does it happen that Steph Curry was committed to the sport at a young age that led to him being a professional athlete? Or even more so, when you take a look at tennis player Andre Agassi, who's gone from being a youth player to an elite player, and now he plays pickleball as a retiree from his sport. How does someone stay involved? What can we do to ensure that they stay involved with us and that we retain them as participants and as customers? If we take a look at the ADM model that's proposed by the United States Olympic Committee, it's very focused on this idea that there are these logical sequences that individuals move through. If you take a look at stages 1 and 2, they're the younger stages when kids get engaged with sports. And we talk about this as when you take a look at the definition provided by Bloom on your right-hand side, that the entire process involves encouragement, nurtures, and education. What it's talking about is trying to retain athletes all the way through to the 5th and final stage. But the reality is that in the younger stages of 1 and 2, that the model is set that we're actually driving young participants away from our sports by being too competitive and specializing in sports. Thus, there's some significant negative impacts associated with that reality. Just take a look at these numbers right here. That in an old model, of an old club that focused on this competitive type environment, they had an enrollment of 500. They lost almost half of their participants, 235 to be exact. And if each of them were paying $500, the loss of revenue would be $117,500 of a potential $250,000. In a new model that focused on retention and utilize some of the practices associated with ADM, but also just good retention strategies, that defection rate dropped to 17%, meaning they only lost 85. Still a little high, but the average retention is around 10%. Defection is around 10%. And a fee at $500, the lost revenue is only $42,000 or $42,500, a difference of over $75,000. So keeping your athletes engaged is not only good for the sport, but it's also good business. Now, here on a larger scale, taking a look at this, again, going back to this idea of bad retention. If one child defects in stage 1 at the very beginning stages, the initial cost is $100, but the lost income of that child over the lifetime of the remaining stages, if they were on a competitive track that may cost more, it would be $35,000. And if it's more participation track, it would only be about $22,000. Now, losing 40% of that initial group of 100 participants over the lifetime of it could equal up over $1.4 million in lost revenue in a competitive track and close to $1 million in a participation track. Compare that to a good retention, and as I said before, 10% is not a bad rate. That it's very common that some people, for whatever reason, aren't going to come back to your sport. So if you only lose 10%, that would mean $350,000 on the competitive track and $224,000 in the participation track. There's a difference between $1 million. A competitive would be $1 million, and a participation track over $670,000. Again, taking a look at the financial benefits for an organization, keeping our participants, our customers, our athletes engaged and retained is important financially, but it's also good for the sport. So when we talk about retention, we're going to break down each one of these. We'll be talking about, and these were proposed by the researchers that are listed on the right-hand side. Then when we talk about retention, all of these elements are associated with retention, starting with the brand preference, followed by perceived quality, or perceived equity, then perceived quality, the expected switching costs, customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, and lastly, perceived value. So let's take a look at each one of these. We'll define it and then talk about strategies that you can incorporate into your club to impact this variable that ultimately will be impacting the retention of the athletes staying within your organization. So first thing, we talk about brand preferences. It's the extent of an individual favoring a designated service, that being your club. And in comparison to other ones that are out there, as we all know, there are other clubs in our sports as well as other activities that are out there that we compete against. So the first thing is, as far as our strategies are concerned, is number one, understanding who we are as a product. What are we offering? We talk about missions and understanding what exactly that we're doing and our purposes. We need to know that in advance so we can communicate that. That's next thing is talking about the communication with our customers. We need to be talking with them informally. We often say that some coaches say, I don't like to talk to my parents, before practices, after practices, but they should. They should be communicating and let them know what's going on. Same with the leadership of the organization. They should be out and about, creating conversations, listening as much as they're speaking to the members of the organization. There's also going to be formal communications as far as whether it be newsletters, emails, information on a website, all those things. We like to term it as a continuous slow drip, that we're constantly communicating with our customer so that they know us. More tied with that is the development and utilization of a customer relations management system. Do we know when we've communicated with a customer? Do we know when they're engaging with us? And keeping track of all those different interactions that we have with them. We also have to be aware of our competition, that we need to know what they're doing, how much they're charging, what modifications, what improvements are they making there, that we have that opportunity to look at ourselves and see if we're keeping up or being better than what they are. And then we start talking about marketing, or manipulating our marketing piece. Some simple things that you can do to eventually, to make your club or your sport more preferable than another is flexibility as far as time and day of practices. Has anyone ever thought about the fact that we often schedule a practice around the coach's schedule as opposed to the participants? Just a simple thing like that to say that a coach is going to say, hey, I'm running practice on Thursday nights, and a kid on that team has a conflict on that Thursday night. Now they may not come. Is there ever a thought of being that in advance, the participants sign up for the night that they want to participate, and then they're assigned to that night, and the coach sits there for that night? There you're listening and working with your customer to try to meet their needs so that you become their preferred brand. Another idea is when we start talking about a cafeteria menu approach as far as sports are concerned, the day, the weeks, and the seasons. There'll be some organizations will say that, hey, we have a fall season, or a particular season that's very committed. Another one, a year-round program that's also going to be very committed. There may be another that's going to be year-round, but only a lesser committed, so that the athlete can be involved in a number of different activities. Developing different products that will meet the needs of the customer is going to impact your retention in a positive way. And the last one is that often when we take a look at the youth sport environment, that different kids develop as far as their physical development. That this idea that if someone hasn't developed physically that's in an older age group, can they make a request to have a variance, an age division variance form? Meaning that, can they make a request to go down lower because they have an opportunity maybe to have more success based upon the fact that they haven't developed physically to keep up with their current age group? At the end of the day, are you taking steps to ensure that you are the selection of your customer and that people prefer you over the competition? The next is customer satisfaction, and it's the degree of the overall pleasure or contentment with the customer with you. How do we do it? Probably the first is educating and letting people know what you're doing and why you're doing it, so they understand why a particular activity is occurring, or they understand why there's the number of practices that they're doing in a given week. Okay, that's all about the education. The second is survey. Again, getting feedback, and you can do them both formally, as far as whether it be an online survey that's sent out, or informally. Again, just asking questions and listening. One of the most important thing when you start talking about asking questions or soliciting feedback, being prepared for the complaints or the negative data. Complaints, understand that in most complaints, there's an opportunity to get better. A complaint, once you remove the emotion, is really saying that somebody's wants or needs aren't being met. So when we start talking about this negative data, can we listen to it and go back and see if we can get better? Another thing you take a look at is retention, as by team and or coach. Are there particular teams, coach, age levels that have outside the norm a higher defection rate or a lower retention rate than others? May that be the case that there's a problem within that particular coach or a team, and either are you going to be able to fix it or discontinue that relationship with that individual? And do you talk to the people that leave your organization and ask them why? Is it an opportunity for them to get better? Can there be something you do to keep them if you really want them? Okay. And again, the communication among the staff, that you're talking about the people and making sure if they've heard anything about anything that the club or the organization can do be better. And also another kind of neat strategy is bringing your past participants back. That says a lot about your organization. If somebody had played in it, they graduated, moved on, and then they come back to coach in it. It means that they were satisfied with that experience so much that they want to come back and be involved with offering that opportunity for those in the future. Perceived quality, the customer's assessment of the standard of the delivery process. Okay? Are we doing what we say we're doing in a high quality way? Are we implementing, do we have a clear strategy in what we're doing with our organization? Is that strategy communicated? Are we overseeing our coaches and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing in each of the developmental stages? Does our staff look like coaches? Do they look professional? Or do they have the qualifications that we can put out there on the website to say that they're licensed coaches and their degree of success or where they've played, to show that, yes, we have the best people possible working with our coaches? Are we able to get athletes that went through our organization to talk about us, whether it be a video on a website or a quote that we post on that website? But again, those people in the past that are able to say that I've had this experience, it was great for me, and I hope you have the same. Is the potential of having experts coming in and talking about the organization on behalf of the organization? Do we have a quality website and promotional materials that highlight the great things that the organization are doing? And are we willing to modify what we're doing and where we're delivering it to ensure it's of the highest quality? All of those things go back to driving retention. If a person feels that what they're getting is of high quality, they're likely to stay. Value. Value can be defined as the total perceived benefits minus the cost. Am I getting what I'm paying for? Is it worth it? So again, research is going to help drive this. Okay. We start talking about the idea that we don't want to make it inaccessible for them. Is there some way that we can communicate them that their money's being, there's money that they're getting their money's worth? Some interesting things you can show is that, for example, sometimes it's, and this is tied to ADM, can you be showing how many touches over the course of a practice that an athlete is getting, or showing how much of an hour practice they're actually engaged in participating in the sport? It's kind of a shame that, especially in a sport like ice hockey, that where you pay a lot of money for rink, and you have a coach who'll go and talk for over half of a practice while the kids are standing there on their skates. And compare that to a practice where maybe it's broken into small-sided games, maybe they're doing stations, that an athlete may touch that puck over 300 times in the course of that practice, or skate, or shoot, or continue to play, all during the course of that practice. If you can show there's value in what they're paying for, that's going to help drive retention. The perceived equity is the assessment of the fairness and justice of the organization, and and how they respond to complaints. Well, you're often seeing that some sport organizations have a purpose greater than sport, that they want to use sport to communicate. You see this in religious-based organizations and some community-based organizations. One of the big ones are having a courage to disengage with someone or a family that maybe isn't buying into what you're trying to do. You know, here at once is that having the courage to remove a family. What's often interesting is, in the fear of losing one family, you may lose 3 others. And maybe if you find an individual or family isn't interested in what you're trying to do with the organization, asking them to leave will prevent those other 3 from leaving for you. And this is where you lead into it is, are there lessons going to be communicated through sport? I talked on an earlier presentation about the decline of education-based sport. And the one thing there is that when sport was in school, that sport was a carrot to promote education. Are sports clubs willing to have that as a part of it? Are they going to require their athletes to do well academically, even though they're not tied to a sport? It says something about who they are as an organization and what they're promoting. Customer loyalty. Are we treating the customers that remain loyal to us better? Are we giving them extra incentives to show that we appreciate their loyalty? And we start talking about that. Are we promoting friendship among kids and parents, that they become loyal to the organization through that? Do we give some type of rewards or benefits each year that they sign up for the fact that they have remained with the organization? Okay. And I also find it very interesting when we communicate. Who is the customer? Is it the child? Is it the parent? Or is it both? And what are their relationships with them? Do we know about them as a family? Very interesting. I talked earlier about this idea that, or we're talking about it now, about this idea of sports culture in the home. It's kind of interesting. Getting to know your customers is important. Is it the case that an athlete's parent played the sport, maybe coached themselves, fully understand the sport and know what's going on, versus a parent maybe who's never engaged in that sport? We need to know that. We need to communicate with that and develop those relationships so they remain loyal to us over the long haul. The expected cost of the switch. This idea that if somebody decides to defect from your organization, there's going to be costs associated with it. Number one, there may be a loss of benefit and a price promotion, saying that, again, if they decide to leave, they lose some benefits that are associated with the individual that signs up every year. Are you creating a culture where everyone knows everyone so that if an individual leaves that organization, they're not only leaving the organization, they're leaving their friends behind? Are there unique selling points to say to an individual to say that in leaving, you're going to be losing a lot of things along the lines of maybe it may be social, it might be psychological. Think about the amount of time that maybe the reason that the club is so attractive in the first place, it's only a 10-minute drive from their home, where leaving, they're going to turn that into a 40-minute drive to their home to get to that training session. So all of those things and having that communicated that people will feel that making a switch is going to be difficult, that they would want to stay. So again, when we start talking about retention, these are conscious efforts on your part to try to make your brand the most preferred, to show that you stand for something, to show that you're of high quality, to show that it's going to cost a little bit, there's going to be a cost associated with leaving, to promote the loyalty for the club by giving them loyalty, making sure that we know if they're satisfied with what they're doing, and if they're not, if there's some way we can do it, make them satisfied. And then lastly, to see that they see that they're getting their money's worth as far as the organization is concerned. Doing all those things will give you an opportunity to drive retention and increase the likelihood that your participants will stay with you for the long haul. Again, we don't want to be losing kids in those stages 1 and 2, those ages 6 to 10. They're huge as far as the growth of the sport and keeping kids engaged, but also look at it from a financial perspective and the amount of money being lost based upon what you're doing at those youngest stages.